Hello and welcome once again to The Blueprints. This is Canada's Conservative Podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Schmale, Member of Parliament for Haliburton, Forth and Lakes Brock, with new content for you every single Tuesday, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We will have that new content for you every Tuesday throughout the summer. We are not taking a break because that Liberal agenda is moving so quickly. So we ask that you like, comment, subscribe, share this program. If you can't watch or listen to the entire thing right this second, download it, listen to it on platforms like CastBox, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, you name it, it is out there. Another great show lined up for you today. We're bringing back a good friend of ours, Larry Brock, the Member of Parliament for Brantford, Brant. In the beautiful province of Ontario, is also the Deputy Shadow Minister for the Minister of Justice, also the Attorney General for Canada. And the topic today, something he covered briefly on his last appearance, which is getting great feedback on social media, because this is exposing something I think the mainstream media is leaving out, with the Liberal incompetence and what they're doing with the Emergencies Act. But we're also going to talk about something that has come up. It came up very quickly in the headlines and just as quickly disappeared from the national news cycle. And I can imagine why the media doesn't want to talk about it. But 3 years after the events of SNC Lavalin, the Justin Trudeau government is once again facing accusations that they actively meddled in the Canadian justice system to achieve political end. You all remember what happened in SNC Lavalin. So let's bring in Larry Brock here. We're going to talk about the Emergencies Act. We're going to talk about the unbelievable news coming out of Nova Scotia with that inquiry that's going on, the information. So Larry, good afternoon. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Jamie. Happy to be back.
All right, let's just continue on with the Emergencies Act, because that is something you came on a few weeks ago to talk about, some of the developments, some of the interesting back and forth you had with the Deputy Prime Minister, the Finance Minister, Chrystia Freeland, in committee. And we really talked about that. But just around Canada Day, something else happened. The government announced that it would be relieving or taking away cabinet confidence and bringing out a whole bunch of documents that might prove interesting in this whole committee investigation into the circumstances surrounding the Emergencies Act.
Yes, you're absolutely correct, Jamie. Everyone on the committee, the Emergencies Act committee, were quite optimistic that the position that the government took in terms of waiving cabinet confidentiality and cooperating as fully and transparent as possible with Justice Rouleau in his commission work that is yet to be started, but will be starting shortly. We were optimistic that the documentation that we had requested in the Emergencies Act Overview Committee would similarly receive that type of waiver. We have not received anything official yet from the government that sets that out. But I can tell you that I'm less than optimistic as I once was last week, because just yesterday we received a notification of several documents, I should say, that were deposited into our portal for our review in relation to a number of orders that we all agreed to as committee members, compelling various departments of the government to release documentation. So I haven't had a chance yet, Jamie, because it's roughly 57 documents, and each document contains upwards to, several dozens of pages. But I've done a cursory review of the documents, and unfortunately, I see several redacted pages, several paragraphs all blacked out, several pages completely blacked out. So again, less than optimistic that the government is going to hold true in terms of its position that it's taken with Justice Rouleau. So ultimately, we're going to have to look at alternative means to bring this to the House's attention and get a ruling compelling the government to be as transparent as they're supposed to be in relation to this work that we're doing on this committee.
So let me get this straight. So the government made this big fanfare that they're going to produce all the documents that the committee wanted to see, well, the opposition members wanted to see anyway. And it turns out, just on your quick look at the documents in front of you, that a lot of redacted sentences and paragraphs are quite evident in the papers, which probably, and I'm sure you'll find this out as you get into it, won't give you the exact information. You and other members of the committee trying to get to the bottom of why the government used the Emergencies Act to get rid of the protesters on Parliament Hill.
Absolutely. Again, all the government officials that we have interviewed so far, particularly the ministers, have made it abundantly clear that they will cooperate, with the caveat that there is solicitor-client privilege attached to some of the documents, and there's also cabinet confidentiality. So we anticipated, long before there was an announcement with respect to their cooperation with Justice Rouleau, we anticipated that we would receive the documents, that they'd be fully redacted, and we would then look at alternative means to try to get the original documentation for our review. Again, I was somewhat optimistic last week, given its position with Justice Rouleau. Unfortunately, they're not following through on their stated path of open and accountable government. I know that Justin Trudeau made that abundantly clear in 2015 that this would be the most open and transparent government this country has ever seen. And as you know, Jamie, you've been a member of Parliament for a significant number of years, and this is nothing new to this particular Liberal government in terms of not being transparent with the documentation they release to committees.
And they can't even be transparent about the reasons for the Emergencies Act. We also heard it was public safety, then it was economic, and the list just kept changing. Just what would stick to the wall here on the reasons they could use?
It's a changing narrative with every sort of justification that has been debunked. And there have been several justifications that have been debunked and disproven over the course of several months. It always appears that the goalposts continue to keep moving down the proverbial football field, and they look at alternative ways to justify this. So we've already, we've dealt with issues, and there's still issues with respect to Minister Mendocino's, his changing narrative, Justin Trudeau's changing narrative with respect to justification, Minister Blair's changing narrative, Minister Freeland's changing narrative. So it's frustrating for us. It's frustrating for Canadians. We're just trying to get to the truth. Canadians deserve the truth. They need to understand why in the 34 years since this particular bill was introduced and passed as law, as to what circumstances were warranted enough to constitute a national emergency sufficient to basically curtail and suspend our civil liberties as Canadians. We will get to the truth. We will continue to use whatever toolbox, whatever tool we have in the proverbial legislative toolbox to uncover the truth. That is going to be our mission as opposition members on this committee. It's going to be my personal mission to get to the truth, Jamie.
Well, I can tell you when the truth does come out, as it has already, the common theme is it's not Justin Trudeau's fault.
Right.
Just like our airports are a mess. There's lines outside Passport Canada offices, 2 million cases in the immigration file in the immigration department, just laying on desks trying to get through. Nothing is his fault. It is really amazing.
Right. They will not accept responsibility for, in fact, I think I just read something today that we are now the #1 jurisdiction in the world for airport delays, a fact that we ought not to be proud of, a fact that this government knew was going to become an eventual reality, and they simply did not plan. They had no exit plan with respect to the end of this pandemic. And it's unfortunate that Canadians are now feeling the brunt of this incompetent government.
Well, let's continue on the incompetence road. Let's talk about the Mass Casualty Commission here. So that's the federal inquiry. It's looking into the worst ever mass shooting here in Canada. It happened in Nova Scotia. It also is looking about how the RCMP dealt with it, how it managed its communications, the whole gambit from start to finish. But what has come out through the commission and its investigation is, and I quote here from the National Post article on page 103, the report outlines how the commissioner of the RCMP, Brenda Luckie, allegedly dressed down Nova Scotia investigators for their initial refusal to release details about the firearms used by the shooter. And the allegations from the superintendent at the time, and you can fill in some blanks here, is that the people on the ground wanted to hold off on releasing information about the firearms used in the mass shooting so they could hopefully use the tools that the United States had in their FBI, the ATF, to find out the source of those illegal firearms, because they were smuggled across the border illegally. But at the other side, you had the Prime Minister's office and the then Minister Bill Blair of Public Safety, who wanted to, it seems like, use the shooting as an excuse to move forward with their firearms agenda.
This is an appalling set of facts that you have just presented, Jamie. And I think there's no politician in the House that does not feel for the victims and the survivors and the families who have gone through the most horrific attack this country has ever seen. And then to have a government so ethically and morally bankrupt and challenged to take advantage of this particular situation to advance their own agenda is just absolutely deplorable. It's disgusting. And when I think about my time as a former Crown attorney, I look at the values and the ethics that I had to stand by every single day in my practice, in my pursuit of justice, in holding offenders accountable while representing the interests of victims. I did it passionately, I did it diligently, and I took pride. And I also like to think that the whole notion of a politician was once viewed to be a most honorable exercise of public duty. It was an example of the highest level of public service that you could have, not only to your constituents, but also to the country. And with it, you absorb the whole concept of truth and integrity and honesty. And these are values that have been ingrained in Canadians' views of politicians. And to see what is happening around the world, but particularly in this country since 2015, the whole institution of our elected officials, in my view, has been so tarnished by the actions and the virtue signaling and the breaches, the most blatant of ethical and moral breaches by this government. It is no wonder that Canadians have a dim view of politicians being honest and respected. And when you have Justin Trudeau, who made significant promises in 2015 before he became our next prime minister, that his government would be the most open, the most transparent, that Canada would be back on the world stage, there was a level of optimism that excited Canadians. And then to have one series of missteps and political gaffes, but more importantly than that, some of the stuff could be excused as a new government. But as we got deeper and deeper into his mandate, Jamie, and after several elections and several mandates, repeating the same lines about how transparent and ethical his government is, there's just example after an example that he is disappointed and let down Canadians. This being the most recent. The SNC Lavalin, previous to that, was another example where he took immediate steps to interfere in a criminal prosecution where he had no business interfering with, and directed the then Attorney General and Minister of Justice to exercise her political clout just to make amends to a company that was, again, morally and politically bankrupt, facing serious criminal charges. To interfere in that and to avoid a criminal prosecution. And then to have our Prime Minister look in the camera, look to Canadians from coast to coast to coast, and lie to Canadians and indicate in no which way or form did he interfere or direct the Minister of Justice and the Attorney General to take whatever corrective steps were required in the circumstances. All of that was a lie. And then to be to be discovered to be a lie, and to have the ethics commissioner declare that he had breached the conduct of ethics, to have him basically try to throw it under the carpet, sweep it under the carpet, and not apologize to Canadians for that breach of trust, that breach of ethics. And now this most recent example, there is a firewall, Jamie, that exists between politicians and law enforcement. And it is clear that they looked for an advantage. They said the right things. They showed empathy to Canadians. They showed that as a federal government, they were taking the appropriate steps. But all along, he had years and years and years to introduce this legislation, but chose the timing, which was not coincidental, to follow on the steps of this worst mass shooting tragedy this country has ever seen, to take advantage and instruct either himself or the Privy Council or Minister Blair, as he then was, the Minister for Public Safety, to essentially direct the Commissioner of the RCMP to advise that certain details of the firearms needed to be released. And kudos to the supervisor on the ground who fought back and said to his ultimate boss, I can't do that. It's going to compromise the investigation. And to have other like-minded individuals reported now in the paper to say how disgusted and how dismayed and concerned they were of this overt political influence is something that Canadians ought to take notice of and ought to be extremely concerned. These are classic examples, Jamie, of what you see in kangaroo countries and political entities around the world where authoritarianism and totalitarianism exists. This does not exist in pure democratic countries. And what this prime minister is doing and what his ministers are doing is inexcusable. There has to be accountability. I can't comment on Commissioner Lucky. That's something that she's going to have to deal with. She certainly has some challenges in terms of facing the Canadians, facing the government in terms of her role in this particular matter. But as far as Minister Blair is concerned, as far as members of the Privy Council is concerned, this warrants a full examination. And I know that several witnesses later this month are going to be called to a special hearing of the Public Safety Committee. I'm hoping that I could take advantage of that and be in a position where I can ask certain people some questions to get to the heart of this matter, to find out why there was that level of interference when there ought not to have been. So certainly, Jamie, this is something that the press certainly became aware of towards the latter days of our session before we rose for the summer break. And it's something that we will not forget. And it's something that our party, I know, will not forget. And we will continue to bring this to the attention of the Canadians. They deserve the truth, and they deserve to have a government that represents them honestly and ethically.
Well, let's build on what you said about Canadians must take notice and be concerned. I agree with that. And this is just kind of a personal pet peeve of mine. If you can compare what has happened in the past. You remember Mike Duffy, the whole thing around Mike Duffy and his expenses. That was wall-to-wall coverage by the media to talk about a senator who filled out expense forms that were questionable. And it was reimbursed by the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff out of his personal funds, all that. That was wall-to-wall. Nothing new seemed to develop, but yet the media was talking about it day in, morning, noon, and night. Now we have a situation that it looks like the government may have interfered in a police investigation to further their own political agenda, but yet the media talked about it for a little bit. But then once something else shiny and new came, they quickly, as quick as possible, turned their attention. And this should be something that's still in the headlines because, as you said, this is something that should not be happening in a G7 nation, but yet Correct. It is. And it's just being silenced for the last week or so. This should be front page until we have a resignation of a minister or people coming forward, as you said, will happen in the committee, but this should be sped up. This is absolutely ridiculous.
Couldn't agree more. And I'm not here to opine on what the press, the reasons why the press aren't following this as diligently as they should, because this is not the first time that this has happened. This is a direct pattern of interference, where the Prime Minister and his ministers are simply not following a code of conduct that Canadians expect from their elected officials, particularly the government itself. If we don't have an ethical government and an honest government, what do we have, Jamie? What do we have to look forward to? And it really concerns me that the press is assisting this bad behavior to continue, silencing the public and not keeping this at the heart of people's discussions, at dinner tables, at barbecues, at functions. This is something that strikes, again, I commented at the very beginning, it strikes at the erosion of public confidence in our democratic institutions. And as a new-time politician, Jamie, as someone who has followed politics all of his adult life, it really greatly concerns me that this is the sort of blueprint that we can expect from this government. And there has to be accountability. So hopefully, your show and other like-minded shows and conservative colleagues of ours from coast to coast to coast will use this opportunity to continue this discussion, to have these opportunities of sharing this on social media so that we keep this discussion alive. If the press won't do it for us, we will do this to educate Canadians until we have this government held accountable. We know the ethics commissioner is probably going to weigh in on this, just like they weighed in on the SNC Lavalin scandal, but that's going to take several months, several years to unfold. Canadians deserve an answer, and they need it. They need the information. It's our job to get that information out.
I couldn't agree with you more. And as usual, this always happens way over time. But as you know, I always give the guests time for the last word. I don't know if there's anything you want to build on. I think you ended that perfectly, but the floor is yours if you have anything else to say.
Jamie, as the prosecutor in me now, first-time politician, I will continue to take that proverbial onion and just take layer off a layer off a layer until we find out the truth, till we expose all the actors complicit in this blatant breach of ethics and integrity, and we want accountability. That is our role as opposition members. That is my role as a Conservative member on the Emergencies Act Declaration Committee. It's my role as Member of Parliament for Brantford Brant. I will pursue that truth.
Larry Brock, it is always amazing talking to you. Always great insight. We will have you back on the show as this starts to progress and comes out in committee. And I know you will love to inform the listeners and viewers as to what's going on. Thank you very much.
Fantastic.
Larry Brock, Member of Parliament
Jamie.
for Brantford Brant, also the critic, the deputy critic for justice, and the Attorney General for Canada. We do appreciate Larry's time and your time as well. Because we value that, we will come back with new content for you every single Tuesday, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We ask that you like, comment, subscribe, share this program, because as Larry outlined quite eloquently, the media isn't covering this. This needs to be at the top of the headlines all the time to educate Canadians and let them know what's going on, because there is some pretty serious stuff going on. That's why we need you to also tell your friends about this program. Download it, listen to it on platforms like Castbox, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, you name it. It is out there. Together, we can push back against that ever-moving liberal agenda. Next Tuesday, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, new content for you. And remember, as always, low taxes, less government, more freedom. That's the blueprint.